an exquisite 500 necklace. The way it shimmered under the store lights mesmerized me, and for a fleeting moment I hesitated. Maybe I deserved a little reward. Just as I was contemplating the purchase, a small hand suddenly tugged at me. "Mom, that's way too expensive. You're not worth it." My son Lucas frowned, his voice laced with undisguised disdain and disapproval. The saleswoman arched an eyebrow, the corners of her mouth curving into a barely perceptible smirk. I glanced around. Other shoppers in the store were indulging in their purchases, their faces brimming with satisfaction. And yet here I was standing in the middle of a jewelry store, humiliated by my own child. Was this really the boy I had raised with my full heart for 7 years? I gently tightened my grip on the necklace, my gaze steady as I looked at him. My voice was as cold as the winter wind. Wrong. I am absolutely worth it. At that moment, I made a decision. I would never again allow anyone to belittle me or deny my worth. The moment we stepped into the house, Lucas ran straight to Daniel, clutching his leg as if he had just uncovered a grave injustice. "Dad, Mom bought a 500 necklace for herself." Feigning disapproval, Daniel turned to me with a sigh. "Seriously? You don't even have an occasion to wear it. Why waste money on something so expensive?" Then, as if reading from a well-rehearsed script, he added, "I don't blame the kid for saying something. We're not some wealthy family. Just return it." I stared at the father and son duo, perfectly in sync, their judgment weighing down on me. "So what now?" I said, my voice icy. "After everything I've done for this family, I don't even deserve to spend 500? Lucas clung tighter to Daniel's leg, his face scrunched up in righteous indignation. "Well, yeah. Dad works so hard every day to make money and you don't even have a job. What gives you the right to spend his money?" A sharp pang shot through me. Daniel had been grinding away at his job for years, barely scraping together $4,000 a month. Between the mortgage, the car loan, and our everyday expenses, our finances were always stretched thin. If it weren't for my meticulous budgeting, this household would have crumbled long ago. And before I gave birth, I was earning over 10 grand a month. I had a promising career ahead of me, until Daniel sweet-talked me into staying home, insisting our child needed his mother. I had been a fool. What cut even deeper was Lucas' words. I could have gone back to work after having him. That was the plan. But at the last minute, Daniel's mother, who had promised to help with childcare, backed out. Left with no other option, I quit my job to take care of our newborn. My world shrank. My conversations with friends shifted from work gossip to diaper brands and baby formulas. My professional network faded away, replaced by other neighborhood moms who were just as trapped as I was. I had sacrificed everything for this child. And yet, this son I carried for 9 months, the one I poured my heart and soul into raising, had the audacity to tell me I didn't deserve a necklace because I didn't make money. He even tried dragging me back to the store, demanding I return it. As I stood there, his words replayed in my head, each one a dagger to my heart. I was so furious I could hardly breathe. And yet I couldn't say a single word. I stormed into my room and slammed the door shut. As if shutting them out physically could somehow bury the undeniable truth. I had made a terrible choice. At the exact moment Daniel and Lucas stood united against me, a thought sparked in my mind. Divorce. If they didn't love me, then I needed to take back the love I had wasted on them. From now on I would love myself. That night I didn't cook dinner. The father and son must have thought they were punishing me by ignoring my absence in the kitchen. They ordered pizza for themselves. Not a single slice for me. I didn't care. I spent the night untangling my thoughts, planning my next steps, and by the time I finally fell asleep it was late. So late that I overslept the next morning. By the time I woke up, Lucas was already scrambling to get dressed, his face contorted in frustration. "Mom, why didn't you wake me up? Now I'm late." What kind of mother does that? That's exactly why I don't want to be your mother anymore. I swallowed the words down, casting him a glance. "I'm not a good mother. You should go find your dad." Lucas screeched in outrage and immediately called Daniel. Daniel had already left for work, but the second he heard his precious son's complaints, he didn't hesitate to take a leave of absence and rush home to drive Lucas to school. By then I was already dressed and out the door. If I wanted a divorce, the first step was securing a job. 7 years as a stay-at-home mom meant I had no savings, And walking away from this marriage without a financial cushion would be downright foolish. I used to be a project manager well regarded in my field. But as I scrolled through LinkedIn and sent out resume after resume, the responses trickled in rejections. Every company gave the same excuse. 7 years out of the workforce? You're behind on industry trends. Fine. I lowered my expectations, willing to start from scratch. Yet even then, HR representatives subtly hinted that I was no longer the right fit. High-level positions rejected me for my lack of recent experience. Entry-level jobs rejected me for being overqualified. Even the local coffee shops wouldn't hire me. Apparently, I wasn't trendy enough to keep up with the younger crowd. By midday, the scorching sun bore down on me. Sweat trickled down my forehead as I wiped it away with the back of my hand. Passing by a convenience store, I paused. Inside, the freezer was stocked with rows of colorful drinks and ice cream bars. Maybe I should treat myself to something sweet. I reached for a chocolate ice cream bar. At the last second, I changed my mind and grabbed the cheapest bottle of ice water instead. My phone vibrated again. I didn't even have to check. It was Daniel. Let me guess, he is calling to yell at me. I was in no mood to deal with him. Without hesitation, I blocked his number. I'd unblock him when I got home. The second I stepped through the door, Daniel was on me like a missile. You're mad at me? Fine. But how could you just neglect Lucas like that? Because of you, he was late and I had to leave work. Do you know how much crap I got from my boss? I fired back without missing a beat. I've taken care of Lucas for 7 years. You couldn't handle him for a single day? Some father you are. I was throwing his own words right back at him, the same ones Lucas had used against me. Daniel's face darkened. You're his mother. If you don't take care of him, who will? I let out a cold laugh. That's funny. You're his father. Why is it only my job to take care of him? His mouth opened. But nothing came out. For the first time, he had no comeback. Maybe because he realized I had just called out his pathetic excuse for fatherhood. Scoffing, I turned on my heel and went back to my room. Daniel and Lucas must have decided to freeze me out entirely. That night, they ordered pizza again. Again, they didn't ask if I wanted any. I didn't care. I stayed in my room, scrolling through job listings. They could eat pizza every night for all I cared. I had already eaten dinner on my own, just like I would from now on. For 3 straight days. I hit nothing but dead ends. Every employer had an excuse. Either I lacked recent experience or I was overqualified, or worse, they treated me like a fool, offering opportunities that were nothing more than unpaid labor disguised as training. My initial determination, the fiery resolve to leave this marriage and reclaim my life, had dwindled into exhaustion. Every day I came home drained, only to be met with the cold indifference of the father and son duo. One night, as Lucas munched on a bag of chips, he sighed dramatically. Their is too much homework. I'll never finish it. Daniel. Ever the indulgent father reached over and patted his shoulder with a doting smile. Don't stress yourself out, buddy. Take a break, watch some cartoons. You can do it later. Lucas cheered and turned to look at me, his lips curling into a smirk. That's the best. Not like someone who always forces me to do things I don't want to. I knew exactly who that someone was. I stared at him, my expression unreadable. Once upon a time, I was the mother who sat beside him every evening, patiently explaining every question on his homework. I was the one who worried about his grades. The one who mapped out a future for him with meticulous care. Yet, in his eyes, I was the villain, the evil mother who made him study while Daniel, who let him slack off, got to play the role of the good dad with just a single effortless line. If you don't want to study, don't. No. Without my supervision, Lucas had already grown lazy. But it wasn't my problem anymore. His future was no longer my concern. After days of fruitless job hunting, I finally accepted reality. I needed help. The first person who came to mind was Annie. She had been my best friend in college. A fierce and ambitious career woman. We used to share everything, pushing each other forward in the corporate world. But after I left my job to become a mother, our connection had gradually faded until it disappeared entirely. I hesitated before dialing her number. When she picked up, her voice came through the line, carrying a hint of sarcasm. Oh, I can't believe it. Haven't heard from you in forever. What's the occasion? Got tired of playing house with your husband and kid? I understood what she meant. We had always looked down on women who gave up their independence to rely on a man. Yet in the end I had become exactly what we used to despise. I swallowed my pride and told her about my struggles finding a job. Without hesitation she set a time to meet. When I saw Annie again it felt like stepping into an alternate reality. She sat across from me, radiating confidence in a chic designer outfit, her hair styled in perfect waves, the kind of effortless glamour you only saw in TV dramas. The kind of woman I used to be. Instinctively, I clenched the hem of my 2-year-old blouse, suddenly hyper-aware of how outdated and worn I looked. Annie studied me then cut straight to the point. "You're looking for a job but can't find one?" I nodded. She sighed. "Yeah, the job market is tough right now. Companies are hesitant about hiring someone who's been out for so long. But don't take it personally, it's not about your skills." Blunt but honest. She wasn't sugarcoating anything and I appreciated that. "Come work for me," she said. A few years ago, Annie had spotted an opportunity and quit her job to start her own media company. She had ridden the wave of the influencer boom and now her business was thriving. She casually mentioned that 2 of the content creators under her agency had already hit 1 million followers. "I'm building up a new talent and need a scriptwriter for their content. I'll have someone train you but it won't be easy." I had been in the workforce long enough to know that starting over required effort. But at least in this world hard work paid off. Unlike in my home, where years of sacrifice had earned me nothing but contempt. Annie laid out the salary structure, the revenue split, and told me to report to her office the next day. I could barely contain my excitement. If possible, I would have followed her out of the cafe right then and there. Annie patted my shoulder and smirked. "Do a good job. Get your finances in order and divorce that selfish bastard already. I told you years ago Daniel wasn't worth it. He had never liked him. Back when we were dating she had warned me countless times. But I had been blinded by love. I had not only married him, but I had given up everything for him. I had let him talk me into quitting my career, into becoming nothing more than a housewife and mother. I had ignored Annie's warnings. But at least now it wasn't too late. I still had a chance to start over. After joining Annie's studio I threw myself into learning, devouring every bit of knowledge I could. I stayed late every night refining my skills, rewriting scripts over and over again. Annie and her team were as strict as I had expected. Every draft I submitted was returned covered in corrections, forcing me to revise, rethink, and rewrite. By the end of my first month, I had only managed to earn $2,000. But I wasn't discouraged. Holding my first paycheck in 7 years, I treated the team to coffee, thanking them for their patience and guidance. This was just the beginning. I would climb higher step by step. It wasn't until I received a call from Lucas' violin teacher that I realized I had completely ignored the father-son duo for an entire month. "Mrs. Gray, I wanted to check if Lucas is still continuing his lessons. He hasn't shown up for any classes this month." My grip on the phone tightened. "If he's dropping out, could you at least settle last month's tuition?" She hesitated before adding, "And also last time Lucas." I cut her off without a second thought. "Sorry, Miss Sussy, I'm no longer responsible for anything concerning Lucas. If you have any issues, please call his father." I recited Daniel's number and ended the call with a polite but firm goodbye. That evening, Daniel, who had barely acknowledged my presence for weeks, suddenly had a lot to say. Storming up to me, his face darkened with anger. "How the hell could you not pay Lucas' violin tuition? Do you know how humiliating it was to get that call at work? In the middle of a meeting, no less." Apparently, Miss Sussy had called him repeatedly, and by the time he finally answered, his entire department, including his boss, was already aware that he had been dodging his own son's tuition fees. I listened to his rant with a calm expression, letting him unload every ounce of frustration. When he finally ran out of steam, I looked up at him, my voice cold. "If you're taking him to lessons, then you should be the one paying for them. There's no need to take that attitude with me." I let out a slow smile, tilting my head mockingly. "Oh wait. My mistake, Lucas hasn't even been going to class for an entire month. What a fantastic job you're doing as a father." Nothing wounded a mediocre man more than a bruised ego. Daniel was already the lowest paid employee in his department, constantly overshadowed by even the interns. Now, thanks to Ms. Sussy, he had been publicly shamed as a deadbeat parent too. His face burned red. He pointed a trembling finger at me, unable to form a coherent sentence. Then with a burst of frustration he snapped, "What the hell happened to you? You don't cook, you don't clean, you disappear early in the morning and come back late at night, and now you're neglecting Lucas. He's your son. I arched a brow. What happened to me? Are you serious? Wasn't I always like this before we got married? I took a step closer, my voice razor sharp. Yes, Lucas is my son. But tell me, Daniel, could I have had him alone? He's yours too, yet somehow, everything about him has always been my responsibility while you got to pick and choose when to be a father. I exhaled slowly, my patience gone. I have a job now, Daniel. I'm busy. Don't bother me with these petty problems anymore. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time he had nothing to say. I thought Daniel would finally back off, but I underestimated him. The next morning I walked into the living room and froze. There, sitting on the couch with bags and suitcases piled around her, was Daniel's mother, Laura. For a moment I thought I was still dreaming. We had just fought late into the night, and somehow by 5 in the morning, Laura had already arrived. Had she rushed over in the middle of the night? The moment she saw me, she launched into a tirade. Look at the time. Still lazing around in bed? Get up and make breakfast for Daniel and Lucas. I rolled my eyes. I'm not cooking. Whoever wants breakfast can make it themselves. Yawning, I turned on my heel and headed back to my room. Laura, clearly offended, huffed and stormed into the kitchen, dragging her mountain of bags with her. For the next 2 hours she clattered around, pots and pans banging nonstop. It wasn't just me who was losing sleep. Daniel finally snapped. Mom, what the hell are you doing? He shouted from the bedroom. Laura glared at me as she carried a tray of food to the table. I'm making breakfast. Since Allison refuses to take care of her family, I have to do it. That was when she noticed I had walked out of the guest room instead of the master bedroom. Her face darkened instantly. Why are you two sleeping in separate rooms? Daniel seized the opportunity like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. Allison's been sulking ever since I refused to let her buy a necklace. That's why she's acting like this. Then, with exaggerated distress, he added, it cost $500. I barely make a few thousand a month. How could I justify such a wasteful expense? Laura gasped, turning her full attention to me. Allison, dear, Daniel doesn't make that much money. You've got a mortgage, a car to maintain, and a child to raise. How could you even think about throwing away so much money on something completely useless? And besides, you don't even work. Shouldn't you be thinking about saving for the family? If this had been before, back when I was a stay-at-home mom, I might have bitten my tongue and let it slide. After all, $1,000 wasn't a small amount. But now I was earning my own money. Straightening my back, I met her gaze heat-in. Daniel and I have joint finances. I have just as much right to spend our money as he does. Then I turned to Daniel, watching the smug look on his face vanish. Didn't you tell your mother? I have a job now. Silence. The moment hung in the air, thick and heavy. Then, for the first time in years, I turned away without hesitation, without feeling like I owed an explanation. And damn, it felt good. Behind me, Daniel stomped his foot like a petulant child. Allison doesn't cook, doesn't clean, doesn't even take care of Lucas anymore. Now my own mother comes over and she doesn't even have the decency to welcome her? Then with pure frustration he blurted out, all this over a damn necklace? During the past few weeks of working late nights and early mornings, I had barely even seen Lucas. Now, as I finally took a good look at him, I was shocked. He had gained a noticeable amount of weight and was currently devouring a giant piece of fried chicken, grease smeared all over his mouth and hands. No surprise there. Before Laura showed up, Daniel had been feeding him nothing but takeout, mostly fast food. Of course he had put on weight. Laura, sitting beside him, stroked his back as if he were fragile porcelain. My poor baby, she cooed, shaking her head dramatically. He's lost so much weight. Allison, how could you neglect your own son like this? Lost weight? Was she blind? Over the past few days, Laura had appointed herself as the household authority, bombarding me with passive-aggressive lectures whenever she got the chance. She was determined to turn me back into the obedient daughter-in-law she had once controlled. And if that meant insulting me every chance she got, so be it. That day, as I tried to avoid another unnecessary argument, she deliberately raised her voice, her tone dripping with mockery. Some people, she said, casting me a pointed look, spend all day running around outside, acting like they're too good to be mothers. So heartless. I actually laughed at that one. Was she talking about me? Or about her own son? Seeing that I ignored her, she turned back to Lucas and coached him in that same syrupy voice. Sweetie, we don't want bad mommies, do we? The ones who don't cook or clean or take care of their children. Lucas, catching on to her game, parroted her words with enthusiasm. No bad mommies. I didn't react. But as I walked past them, Laura did something unbelievable. She grabbed Lucas' greasy little hand and smacked me with it. Bad mommy. Bad mommy. Lucas giggled, delighted by the game. Grease and crumbs smeared across my clothes. That was it. I grabbed Lucas by the shoulders, stopping him immediately. The moment I touched him, he burst into loud, dramatic wails. Laura rushed forward, clutching him to her chest like I had just assaulted him. Look at him. You scared him. What kind of mother does that? You should be ashamed of yourself. I stayed calm. He just disrespected his own mother, I said, my voice steady. Should I have just stood there and let him hit me? Or do you think this kind of behavior is acceptable? Laura's face twisted. I was just trying to help. If you were actually taking care of him, I wouldn't have to be here doing your job. I laughed, a cold, bitter sound. Helping? I scoffed. You've been in this house for less than a week, and already you've taught my son that his own mother is worthless. That's not help. That's sabotage. She stammered, looking for a comeback. Then, like a well-rehearsed play, she collapsed onto the couch and started crying. I only came to help. She sobbed. I just wanted to take care of my family. But you're never home, you're fighting with Daniel. You're ignoring Lucas, God knows what you're even doing out there. And just like that, Lucas started crying too. The two of them wailing in unison, creating the perfect victim performance. What is going on? Daniel finally emerged from wherever he had been hiding, stepping into the room like a man forced into action. He took one look at his mother and son crying and immediately turned on me. He snapped. How could you be so disrespectful to my mother? He barely let me speak before turning to Lucas. Gathering him up in his arms like the picture-perfect father. The same man who had never done bedtime stories, who had never even remembered school events, was now rocking Lucas like he was the world's most devoted dad. His voice turned soft, gentle, filled with warmth he had never once used on me. Shoo, buddy. It's okay. It's all Mommy's fault. We don't have to talk to Mommy anymore. Each word dripped with fake sympathy. Each syllable reinforcing the same idea: I was the villain. He had always done this. Hiding behind me. Hiding behind his mother. Hiding behind Lucas. Letting others do the dirty work, then swooping in at the last moment to reap the rewards. For years I had swallowed my anger. I had sacrificed everything for this family. And all I had gotten in return was contempt. This was the last straw. I took a deep breath and, with absolute finality, said the words I had been holding back for far too long. Daniel, let's get a divorce. Daniel stared at me in disbelief. Divorce? Allison. Have you lost your mind? For a moment he was too stunned to speak. In all these years, I had never once defied his so-called authority. This is all because of some stupid necklace and you re-throwing our marriage away over it? I didn't bother denying it. Because, in a way, he was right. The necklace had been the spark, but the fire had been burning for years. Realizing I wasn't going to back down, Daniel's expression twisted into something ugly. Fine, he spat. Let's see who actually needs who. Neither of us hesitated. Like two people making a petty bet. We signed the divorce papers that very day and took them straight to the courthouse. Standing at the entrance, Daniel shot me a cold smirk. Don't come crawling back. A good man like me? You won't find another. I let out a dry laugh. Who cares? The court clerk double-checked our decision and asked if we wanted to finalize the financial and custody arrangements. Before I could speak, Laura barged in. Lucas is staying with us. She snapped. And Allison doesn't get the house or the car. The clerk, visibly irritated by her outburst, sighed. You can negotiate privately or settle this in court. I didn't hesitate. There's nothing to negotiate. I don't want the house or the car. Split the savings 50-50. Daniel looked momentarily shocked by how easily I let everything go, but I didn't care. Within minutes, the paperwork was filed and all that was left was to wait for the final decree. Annie was already waiting for me outside the courthouse. The second she spotted Daniel, she flashed him a middle finger. Daniel, who had always been a coward, the kind of man who never dared to talk back to his boss, didn't even dare to confront her. Annie had always been more successful than him and he knew it. Instead he turned back to me with one last bitter parting shot. It's too late to back out now, Allison. You're going to regret this. Without me you'll be miserable. Before I could reply, Annie shoved me into her car, then rolled down the window just long enough to sneer. Seriously? You think you're some prize? With that she floored the gas, leaving Daniel and Laura in a cloud of exhaust. As Annie drove, she glanced at me from the corner of her eye. Finally, she said, shaking her head. I was starting to think you'd never leave him. I exhaled slowly. It all happened so fast. I didn't even have time to prepare. And now I don't have much in savings. Sure, Daniel had agreed to split the money, but I knew exactly how little was left in our accounts. What I got in the divorce was barely enough to survive on. Annie shot me a knowing smile. Don't worry. I've got your back. I felt a rush of gratitude. I had walked through hell and yet my best friend was still here, still willing to stand by me. But then Annie's expression turned serious. Before you get too relieved, there's something I need to show you. She took me to a quiet coffee shop and found us a secluded booth. After ordering 2 coffees, she pulled out a small stack of photographs and slid them across the table. Take a look. I picked them up, flipping through them slowly. And there he was, Daniel, walking into a hotel with another woman. My grip on the photos tightened. Annie gestured for me to keep looking. I turned to the next image. Then the next. The same woman. The same hotel. Them leaving together, walking side by side. There was no attempt at secrecy, no hesitation. And in one of the photos, Daniel was even carrying her bag, his posture submissive as if he was eager to please her. It was painfully obvious. Daniel was having an affair. I stared at the pictures, waiting for anger, for betrayal, for pain. But there was nothing. Just indifference. She's one of Daniel's company clients, Annie explained. She's taken him to a few business dinners. A friend of mine happened to be at one of those events and recognized him. I frowned, the memories clicking into place. The nights Daniel came home late. The times he was drunk, forcing Lucas to take care of him. Annie's voice turned dry. Funny thing? She's a total player. Sleeps around all the time. But for some reason, she's entertaining the idea of Daniel. I snorted. She must have low standards. Daniel had been struggling at work for months. His performance was at an all-time low, his salary had been cut, and if his numbers didn't improve soon he was on the verge of getting fired. He probably thinks she's his golden ticket, I mused. Annie smirked. Exactly. He divorced you so easily because he's convinced this woman is going to boost his career. He thinks if he plays his cards right he'll get promotions, money, status. He's waiting for his big glow-up. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow sip of coffee. Let him dream. Daniel had bet everything on this woman. But I knew men like him. They never won. Just as Annie predicted, it didn't even take 2 weeks before Daniel came crawling back. His voice on the phone was the same as always, condescending, as if he were doing me a favor. I've been thinking, he began, as if this were some great act of generosity. Since you're Lucas' mother, it's best for his growth if we're together. I can find another partner anytime, but for Lucas' sake we should get back together. Then right on cue, I heard Lucas sniffling in the background. Mom, I miss you, he whimpered. Please come home. Daniel, you bastard. Using our child as emotional blackmail, he really thought this would work? I sighed, pretending to hesitate. Well, think about it. Take care of Lucas in the meantime. The moment I hung up, I called Annie. Annie already had the real story. Daniel's so-called golden ticket, his mistress, had moved on to a competing firm, leaving him stranded. With no client, his sales numbers tanked, and with them his chance at promotion. And just like that, he suddenly remembered the wife who had always been cheap, reliable, and self-sacrificing. I smirked. Nice try, Daniel. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I deliberately dragged things out, refusing to give him an answer. The more I stalled, the more desperate he became, calling me repeatedly, insisting we meet in person. Concerned that he might become unstable, I finally agreed. It had been over 2 weeks since I'd last seen him. The moment he walked in, I barely recognized him. His face was haggard, his usual smugness replaced by exhaustion. Even Lucas, normally full of energy, seemed muted, barely speaking. Daniel's eyes flickered over me, taking in my refreshed appearance. The way I carried myself now, more confident, more alive. For the first time he looked like he wanted to ask, how have you been? But he didn't. And I wouldn't have answered anyway. So I broke the silence first. What do you want? Daniel avoided my gaze. My mom left. I raised an eyebrow. She shouldn't have interfered the way she did. He admitted. I sent her back home. She won't bother us again. So let's just put everything behind us and get back together. I didn't respond. Just watched him. When I didn't take the bait, he nudged Lucas forward. Didn't you say you had something important to tell Mommy? Lucas hesitated, glancing at his father. Daniel had coached him. I could see it in the way Lucas swallowed, the way his small hands clenched into fist. He was scared. Because Daniel must have told him that if he didn't apologize properly, he would lose his mother forever. Slowly Lucas stood up, bowed his head, and muttered the words Daniel had forced into him. Mom, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have made you mad. Please forgive me and come back. Daniel immediately echoed the sentiment. That's right. I'm sorry too, sweetheart. I should have handled my mother and Lucas better. But let's put that behind us and move forward. Even now, Daniel refused to take real responsibility. Everything was always someone else's fault, his mother, Lucas, circumstances. Never him. I smiled. Sure, I said lightly. Let's just get the divorce finalized first. Daniel's expression froze. Wait, what? I said. Let's finalize the divorce first, I repeated, my tone calm. After that, if you really change, we can talk about getting back together. His jaw dropped. But I came here to get back together, I cut him off. Let's just handle the paperwork first. You still have the car in the house, right? You're not losing anything. Daniel hesitated, calculating his odds. He couldn't argue because technically he was still coming out ahead. And he knew he couldn't force me to agree right now. So after a long pause, he nodded. Fine. In the days leading up to receiving our final divorce decree, Daniel pulled out every trick in the book. Bringing Lucas to see me, acting like the perfect father. Trying to take me out for dinner, reminiscing about old times. Making sure I saw how hard he was trying. None of it worked. I stayed patient. I waited. And finally, on the last day, I held the divorce certificate in my hands. And I was free. Daniel followed closely behind me, waving the divorce certificate in his hand as if it were some kind of victory. All right, sweetheart, now that we've got the divorce finalized, let's go ahead and remarry. You can come home with me tonight. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. After all, I still had some unfinished business in that house. The moment I stepped inside, Lucas latched onto my leg, his face beaming with excitement. To him, I was finally coming back, the perfect housewife, the maid, the caregiver who would do his laundry and cook his meals without question. I gently pried his arms away and walked into the bedroom. Daniel trailed behind me, quietly closing the door, then slipped his arms around my waist, pressing himself against me. I shoved him off. Turning away, I focused on packing. I had left in such a hurry last time that many of my important belongings had been left behind. The clothes didn't matter. But my documents, certificates, awards, those were irreplaceable. I gathered my diplomas, childhood achievement awards, and a few other critical items, stuffing them into a small bag. Then I reached into the pile and pulled out 2 photographs, tossing them onto the bed. Daniel glanced at them, his expression shifting from confidence to sheer panic. The images were clear, him and his mistress entering and leaving a hotel together. His face drained of color. What the hell is this supposed to mean? He asked, voice unsteady. I met his eyes, my tone calm but firm. It means, I said slowly, we're done. For good. Realizing his plan had failed, Daniel's mask of composure shattered. He turned defensive, his voice rising. Are you serious? I'm a man, you haven't let me touch you in months. I had needs, Allison. What was I supposed to do? Every man does it. Are you really going to throw everything away over a mistake? I smirked. Not every man screws around with his own client. His nostrils flared. Who I sleep with is none of your business. We're already divorced, I cut him off, finishing his sentence for him. Exactly. We're divorced. And we have nothing to do with each other anymore. His mouth snapped shut. I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder and walked toward the door. Oh, I added over my shoulder, Lucas' child support will be deposited into your account. That's the last thing we have to discuss. Daniel was shaking with rage, but I didn't care. I stepped out of the bedroom, leaving him fuming behind me. Lucas stood in the hallway, his wide, uncertain eyes meeting mine. He whispered, hesitant. Lucas was still my child. I had carried him for 9 months, raised him, cared for him. And even though he had hurt me deeply, I still loved him. Kneeling down, I brushed his hair back and smiled gently. Lucas, I said softly, I love you. And whenever you miss me, you can call me. I promise I'll always pick up. His lip trembled. If you ever want to see me, I'll come get you. Anytime. It was the best I could offer him for now. With that, I lifted my bag, and walked toward the door. I had given up so much. I had walked away from the house, the car, the money. But I had won something greater, my freedom. Money. I could make more. A cheating husband. I could replace him. As long as I was free, everything I had lost could be regained. For years I had been trapped. But now I was a bird taking flight once more. As I stepped out of the complex, I ran into Lucy, a fellow mom from the neighborhood. She was carrying her youngest child, returning from an evening walk. Upon seeing me, she smiled politely. Allison, where are you going so late? What's with the suitcase? I met her gaze and for the first time said it out loud. I'm divorced, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. And I'm starting a new life. Her eyes widened in shock. For a moment she was speechless. Then, regaining her composure, she gave me a small nod, though I could tell she was already mentally filing this away to share with the other neighborhood wives. I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them gossip. It didn't matter anymore. As I stepped out onto the street, I spotted Annie waiting for me. She was standing by her car, holding a bouquet of flowers. Bird of paradise. Its petals fanned out like the wings of a soaring bird. Smiling, Annie walked up to me, extending the bouquet. Congratulations, she said, her voice warm. You finally escaped your cage. Years passed before I saw Lucas again. After divorcing Daniel and settling into a stable career, I eventually found love again. His name was Jack, a photographer at Annie's studio. He was 3 years younger than me, thoughtful, supportive, and most importantly, he respected my work. We got married, and before long we welcomed a beautiful daughter, Olivia. It was only after having Olivia that I realized motherhood didn't have to mean suffering. Unlike my experience with Lucas, where I was up every 2 hours breastfeeding, Jack took equal responsibility. He was always there, getting up in the middle of the night, soothing Olivia before I even had to wake up, making sure I was well rested. The postpartum pains I had suffered with Lucas? They never returned. Jack's care and attentiveness made all the difference. If anything, he was the one struggling, his back aching from carrying Olivia all day. Jolting awake at the slightest sound of her cries, his sleep constantly interrupted. Meanwhile, I was able to enjoy a peaceful maternity leave, fully supported by his mother and a professional nanny once I returned to work. For the first time, I understood what it meant to have a true partner. I didn't have to sacrifice myself for my family. I didn't have to put my career on hold. Just like I had once held everything together for Daniel, I now had someone holding everything together for me. Years passed. Olivia grew up in a home filled with laughter, warmth, and love. She was a bright, happy child, full of curiosity, with Jack's artistic spirit and my resilience. With Jack's unwavering support, my career flourished. I had built a name for myself, and Annie's studio had expanded into one of the most influential media agencies in the city. For the first time in my life, I had everything I had ever wanted: a successful career, a loving partner, and a home where I was truly cherished. And then one day Lucas reappeared in my life. It happened unexpectedly. I was at a cafe taking a rare break between meetings when I heard someone call my name. I turned, and for a second, my breath caught in my throat. Lucas. Except he wasn't the little boy I had left behind. He was grown now, taller than I had imagined, his features sharper, more mature, but there was still something unmistakably familiar in his eyes. A mix of uncertainty, regret, and longing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, almost hesitantly, he took a step forward. Can we talk? We sat down, and he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly before finally looking at me. He hesitated. I don't even know where to start. I waited, giving him space. After a long pause, he exhaled deeply. I was wrong. His voice was quiet, but the weight behind those words was immense. I was just a kid, but that's not an excuse. I treated you horribly. I let Dad and Grandma fill my head with lies. I was so convinced that you were the bad guy, but he swallowed hard. But when you left, things didn't get better. They got worse. I could already guess what had happened, but I let him say it. Dad never changed. Grandma left, and he was always too busy, too stressed. There was no one to take care of me anymore. No one to cook, to make sure I did my homework. To make sure he trailed off, his jaw tightening. For the longest time I was angry at you. But when I got older I started realizing things. I saw how Dad treated women, how he blamed everyone but himself. And I started remembering everything. His voice cracked slightly. How you were always there. How you took care of everything. And how, when you finally chose yourself, he stopped looking away. Tears pricked at his eyes. I drove you away, Mom. I exhaled softly, my heart aching not with anger but with understanding. He had been a child. Manipulated, conditioned. He hadn't known any better. I never hated you, Lucas, I said gently. His shoulders shook and suddenly he was no longer the grown young man sitting in front of me. He was just a boy again, the boy I had once raised, loved and sacrificed everything for. He let out a shaky breath, then finally met my gaze. Can I be part of your life again? I smiled. Lucas, you never stopped being my son. The first time he met Olivia he was nervous. Jack was there too, watching with a quiet, measured expression as Lucas shifted awkwardly on the couch. Then Olivia, in all her 5-year-old innocence, bounced up to him and asked, "Are you my big brother?" Lucas blinked, clearly caught off guard. Yeah. Yes, I am." Her face lit up and she launched herself into his arms. "I always wanted a big brother." Jack met my gaze over Olivia's head, and I could see the silent question in his eyes. Was I okay with this? I nodded. Because in that moment I knew no matter how much I had lost, no matter how much I had suffered, I had won something greater in the end. And that's my story. I hope it inspires you to never settle for less. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more.